The winter of 1952 brought the heaviest snowfall Montana had seen in decades. Sarah Mitchell, a 17-year-old girl with determination beyond her years, lived with her family on a small farm outside Billings. Her constant companion was Rex, a German Shepherd mix with keen intelligence and unwavering loyalty. The dog had appeared at their doorstep 3 years earlier, half-starved and injured, and Sarah had nursed him back to health. On this particular February morning, the snow fell so thick that visibility dropped to mere feet. Sarah's father had gone to town the previous day to collect supplies and hadn't returned. Her mother paced the kitchen, wringing her hands and glancing out the frosted windows every few minutes. The radio crackled with reports of blocked roads and stranded travelers. "I'm going to look for Papa," Sarah announced, pulling on her heavy wool coat. Her mother protested, but Sarah's mind was made up. She knew the old railway line that ran parallel to the main road. Even in heavy snow, she could follow the tracks to town. Rex seemed to sense the urgency, staying close to her side as they stepped into the swirling white wilderness. The cold bit through Sarah's layers immediately. Each step forward required effort as the snow reached past her knees. Rex bounded ahead, his dark fur stark against the white landscape, then circled back to check on her progress. The railway tracks provided the only reliable path, though they were nearly buried under the accumulating snow. After walking for what felt like hours, Sarah began to question her decision. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the familiar landmarks had disappeared under the white blanket. Her fingers tingled with cold despite her thick gloves, and her breath formed ice crystals on her scarf. Rex suddenly stopped ahead of her, his ears perked forward and his body tense with alertness. Following Rex's gaze, Sarah squinted through the snow and made out the dark shape of a train car sitting alone on a side track. It seemed oddly placed, separated from any other railway equipment. The car appeared to be an old passenger coach, painted dark green with faded gold lettering barely visible through the weather. Rex whined softly and took a few steps toward the mysterious train car, then looked back at Sarah expectantly. Something about the scene felt wrong to Sarah. Train cars didn't just sit alone on remote tracks, especially not during a blizzard. But the shelter it promised was tempting, and perhaps whoever was responsible for the car could help her find her father, or at least provide directions back home. She called to Rex, and together they approached the silent coach, their footsteps muffled by the thick snow that continued to fall around them. As Sarah and Rex drew closer to the train car, details became clearer through the swirling snow. The windows were fogged from the inside, suggesting warmth within, but no light emanated from the coach. Snow had drifted against the sides and partially blocked the steps leading to the entrance. Rex's behavior grew more agitated with each step, his nose working overtime as he caught scents that Sarah couldn't detect. The door to the train car stood slightly ajar, unusual for such weather. Sarah hesitated, her hand reaching for the cold metal handle. Her mother had always taught her to be cautious around strangers, but the storm was worsening and she desperately needed shelter. Rex pressed against her legs, offering comfort and courage. With a deep breath, Sarah pulled the heavy door open, wider, and stepped into the dimly lit interior of the train car. The warmth hit her immediately, a stark contrast to the bitter cold outside. But something else struck her senses. The unmistakable sound of a baby crying, weak but persistent. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light filtering through the frosted windows. The train car had been converted into a makeshift living space. Blankets hung from the ceiling, creating small private areas. A small wood-burning stove in the center provided heat, its chimney extending through a hole cut in the roof. But what captured Sarah's attention immediately was the source of the crying. A tiny bundle wrapped in a tattered blanket, lying on one of the bench seats. Rex entered behind her, his hackles raised and a low growl rumbling in his throat. He wasn't looking at the baby but toward the far end of the car, where shadows seemed deeper. Sarah followed his gaze and gasped. A man in what appeared to be a police uniform sat slumped against the wall, his hands bound behind his back with rope. A cloth gag covered his mouth, and his eyes, though conscious, held a mixture of pain and desperation. The officer's uniform was torn and stained, suggesting he'd been through some kind of struggle. His badge caught what little light there was, confirming Sarah's initial assessment. But more alarming was the dark stain on his shirt that looked suspiciously like blood. His eyes met Sarah's, and she could see him trying to communicate something urgent through his muffled voice. The baby's crying grew louder, more demanding. Sarah found herself torn between helping the bound officer and attending to the infant. Rex made the decision for her, positioning himself between Sarah and the door while keeping his attention fixed on the shadows at the far end of the car. Something told Sarah they weren't alone with just the officer and baby. Sarah's heart pounded as she processed the scene before her. The baby's cries echoed through the train car, creating an urgent backdrop to her racing thoughts. She moved carefully toward the bound officer, keeping one eye on the shadows that had Rex so concerned. The man's eyes followed her movement, and she could see gratitude mixed with warning in his expression. Kneeling beside the officer, Sarah worked quickly to remove the gag from his mouth. Her cold fingers fumbled with the knot, but eventually the cloth came free. The man gasped, taking deep breaths before speaking in a hoarse whisper. "Thank God you're here," he breathed. "My name is Officer Tom Bradley. There are 2 men who did this to me. They left about an hour ago but said they'd be back. You need to get out of here immediately and get help." Sarah glanced toward the crying baby. "What about the child? We can't just leave it here." Officer Bradley's expression grew pained. "The baby belongs to a young woman they're holding. She's hurt badly and couldn't travel with them in this storm. They left the baby here as insurance that she won't try to escape when they return." He struggled against his bonds. "These ropes are too tight. I can't feel my hands anymore." Working on the knots binding his wrists, Sarah listened as Officer Bradley explained what had happened. He'd been investigating reports of suspicious activity near the old railway junction when he'd stumbled upon what appeared to be a kidnapping operation. 2 men had overpowered him and taken his weapon. They'd been using the abandoned train car as a hideout while they planned their next move. Rex suddenly stiffened, his ears pricked toward the door. A low growl escaped his throat, barely audible but unmistakable to Sarah. She froze, her hands still working at the officer's bonds. Through the storm outside, she could hear voices approaching, muffled by the wind and snow, but definitely human. "They're coming back," Officer Bradley whispered urgently. "Hide behind those hanging blankets. Don't make a sound." But Sarah couldn't abandon the baby, whose cries had only grown more desperate. She looked around frantically for options. The train car offered limited hiding places, and the approaching voices were getting closer. Rex positioned himself near the door, his body tense and ready for whatever might come through it. The voices outside grew clearer, and Sarah could make out angry tones discussing the weather and their delayed plans. She grabbed the baby, wrapping it more securely in the blanket, and crouched behind a partition made of hanging fabric. Rex reluctantly followed her direction to hide, though every instinct told him to protect rather than conceal. Heavy footsteps crunched through the snow outside, and the train car door creaked as it opened wider. 2 men stomped into the train car, shaking snow from their coats and cursing the weather. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the shadows behind the hanging blankets, holding the baby close to muffle its sounds. Rex remained motionless beside her, though she could feel the tension radiating from his body. "This storm's getting worse," the first man said, a tall figure with a gravelly voice. "We might be stuck here another day." The second man, shorter but stockier, moved toward Officer Bradley. "Our friend here still giving you trouble, Tom?" he asked mockingly, using the officer's first name with obvious contempt. "Hope you've been thinking about our proposition." Officer Bradley's voice remained steady despite his circumstances. "I've told you already, I can't help you access the evidence locker. Even if I wanted to, which I don't, there are procedures and other officers involved." Sarah listened carefully, trying to understand what these men wanted. The baby in her arms had quieted, perhaps sensing the danger, but she worried it might start crying again at any moment. Through a gap in the fabric, she could see the shorter man pacing back and forth while the taller one fed wood into the stove. "See, that's where you're wrong," the shorter man continued. "You're the only one with the combination to the safe where they're keeping the evidence from the Henderson case. Your partner doesn't have access, and the sheriff is out of town for another week." The mention of the Henderson case made Sarah's eyes widen. She'd heard her father and other townspeople discussing it in hushed tones. A wealthy rancher named Henderson had been found dead under suspicious circumstances, and rumors suggested he'd been involved in illegal activities before his death. "The Henderson evidence proves our boss had nothing to do with the old man's death," the taller man added. "In fact, it proves Henderson was blackmailing half the county, including some very important people who'd prefer that information never see the light of day." Officer Bradley shifted uncomfortably against his bonds. And you think kidnapping a police officer and threatening an innocent woman and her baby will make this go away? You're only making things worse for yourselves. The shorter man laughed coldly. Nobody knows where you are, Officer Bradley. As far as anyone in town knows, you got caught in the storm while investigating reports of vandalism out here. Could be days before they find you, if they ever do. Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. These men weren't just common criminals. They were part of something larger, more organized. The evidence they wanted must be significant enough to risk kidnapping a police officer. But where was the woman they'd mentioned? The baby's mother. Rex's ears suddenly perked up again, but this time his attention was directed toward the rear of the train car. Sarah followed his gaze and noticed something she'd missed before. A door leading to what might have been a luggage compartment or another section of the car. The slightest movement in the shadows suggested someone might be back there. The baby stirred restlessly in Sarah's arms, and she held her breath, praying it wouldn't cry out and reveal their presence. The two men continued their conversation with Officer Bradley, unaware of Sarah's presence in the shadows. Their voices grew more agitated as they discussed their timeline and the pressure they were under from their mysterious boss. Sarah clutched the baby closer, feeling its tiny heartbeat against her chest as she strained to hear every word. The boss is getting impatient, the shorter man said, checking his pocket watch. He wants this resolved before the road's clear and more law enforcement shows up. Henderson's death stirred up too much attention already. The taller man nodded grimly. Which is why we need that evidence destroyed tonight. Those documents proving Henderson was blackmailing the judge, the banker, and half the county commissioners would ruin a lot of important people. Our boss included. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized the scope of what she'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about one man's death. It was about corruption that reached high into the local government. The evidence these men wanted to destroy could expose crimes that went far beyond a single murder. Officer Bradley spoke up, his voice weaker than before. Even if I gave you the combination, destroying evidence won't make your problems disappear. Too many people already know Henderson was dirty. Killing him just made you all look guilty. The shorter man backhanded the officer across the face, causing Sarah to flinch in her hiding place. Nobody killed Henderson, you fool. The old man had a heart attack when he realized his blackmail scheme was falling apart. But he was smart enough to hide copies of everything in that safe. And now those copies are the only thing standing between our boss and a murder charge he doesn't deserve. Movement from the rear of the train car caught Sarah's attention again. This time she was certain someone was back there, and Rex's continued focus on that area confirmed her suspicions. The baby's mother must be hidden in the back compartment, possibly injured as Officer Bradley had suggested. The baby began to stir again, making small sounds that Sarah feared would grow louder. She gently rocked the infant, trying to keep it calm while her mind worked frantically to find a way out of this situation. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up, which meant help wouldn't be coming anytime soon. We'll give you 1 more hour to think about it, the taller man told Officer Bradley. After that, we start making this personal. The woman in the back is already hurt pretty bad from trying to run. Be a shame if something happened to her baby too. Sarah's blood ran cold at the threat. These men were capable of anything, and she was the only one in a position to help. But she was just a 17-year-old girl with no weapons and no way to contact the outside world. Rex was brave and strong, but even he couldn't take on 2 armed men. The shorter man moved toward the door. I'm going to check the tracks, make sure nobody followed our trail. This storm should have covered most of it, but I want to be certain. As the door opened and closed behind him, Sarah realized this might be her only chance to act. With only 1 man remaining in the car, the odds were slightly better, though still dangerous. She needed a plan that would free Officer Bradley, protect the baby and its mother, and somehow get them all to safety through the raging blizzard outside. With only the taller man remaining in the train car, Sarah knew this was her moment to act. The criminal had his back turned as he fed more wood into the stove, creating just enough noise to cover any small sounds she might make. Officer Bradley's eyes met hers through a gap in the hanging blankets, and she saw him give an almost imperceptible nod of understanding. Sarah carefully placed the baby in a nest of blankets where it would be safe, then whispered the quietest command she could manage to Rex. The intelligent dog understood immediately, positioning himself for what was to come. Years of working together on the farm had created an almost telepathic bond between girl and dog. Moving with the stealth that came from years of hunting and farm work, Sarah crept toward a wooden crate near Officer Bradley. Inside, she'd spotted what looked like the officer's equipment belt, including his service weapon. The taller man continued to work at the stove, occasionally muttering complaints about the weather and their situation. Rex created the perfect distraction by deliberately knocking over a tin cup near the door. The clatter wasn't loud, but it was enough to draw the man's attention away from Sarah for the crucial seconds she needed. As the criminal turned toward the sound, Sarah grabbed the service weapon from the crate and quickly moved behind Officer Bradley to cut his bonds with a knife she'd found among the scattered equipment. The feeling rushed back into Officer Bradley's hands just as the taller man realized something was wrong. He spun around to see Sarah pointing his own weapon at him, her hands steady despite her youth. Behind her, Officer Bradley was working his freed hands, trying to restore circulation while Rex positioned himself between Sarah and the door. "Don't move," Sarah commanded, surprised by the authority in her own voice. "Put your hands where I can see them." The man's eyes darted between Sarah, the weapon, and Officer Bradley, who was struggling to his feet. "You're just a kid," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "You don't know how to use that thing." "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12, Sarah replied calmly. "I've been hunting with him every season since then. At this distance, I won't miss." Officer Bradley finally stood, though unsteadily. "Sarah, keep that weapon trained on him while I secure his hands." He moved carefully, still weak from his ordeal, but determined to regain control of the situation. The sound of the door opening made them all freeze. The shorter man had returned from checking the tracks, and his shocked expression quickly turned to anger as he assessed the changed situation. More importantly, Sarah could see he was carrying a rifle. Well, he said slowly, stepping further into the car. "Looks like we have ourselves a young hero. Problem is, little girl, you can only shoot one of us, and I've got this rifle pointed right at that police officer's head." The standoff stretched taut with tension. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, but each scenario seemed to end badly for someone. Rex growled low, sensing the danger but waiting for Sarah's command. From the back of the car came a weak voice, barely audible but unmistakably female. "Please," the voice pleaded. "Don't hurt my baby. I'll do whatever you want, just don't hurt my baby." The shorter man smiled coldly. "See, everyone's got something to lose here. Now, little girl, why don't you put that weapon down before someone gets hurt who doesn't deserve it?" Sarah's hands remained steady on the weapon, but her mind was calculating odds and outcomes. Officer Bradley caught her eye and gave her a slight signal, indicating he had a plan. The baby began to cry again from its nest of blankets, adding urgency to an already desperate situation. Officer Bradley's signal was subtle but clear to Sarah. He wanted her to trust him and be ready to act when he gave the word. The tension in the train car was suffocating as the shorter man kept his rifle trained on the officer, while Sarah maintained her aim at the taller criminal. "Nobody needs to get hurt here," Officer Bradley said, his voice gaining strength. "You two are already looking at kidnapping charges. Don't make it worse by harming innocent people." The shorter man laughed bitterly. "Innocent? That woman back there saw everything that happened the night Henderson died. She can identify our boss, which makes her anything but innocent in our book." From the rear compartment, the woman's voice grew stronger despite her obvious pain. "I never saw anyone kill Mr. Henderson. He just clutched his chest and fell over when your boss started shouting at him about the blackmail money. It was a heart attack, just like you said." Sarah realized this woman might be the key to everything. If she could testify that Henderson's death was indeed from natural causes, it could clear their boss of murder charges while still exposing the blackmail scheme. But first, they all had to survive this standoff. Rex had been quietly moving closer to the shorter man, using the shadows and hanging blankets for cover. Sarah noticed his position and understood what the intelligent dog was planning. She caught Officer Bradley's eye and nodded slightly, indicating she was ready for whatever came next. "Here's what's going to happen," Officer Bradley announced firmly. "You're both going to put down your weapons and surrender. The storm is clearing, and by morning there will be search parties looking for me. You can't hide forever." As if responding to his words, a distant sound penetrated the train car, the mechanical rumble of a snowplow working to clear the railway line. The shorter man's eyes widened as he realized their isolation was ending sooner than expected. In that moment of distraction, everything happened at once. Rex launched himself at the shorter man's legs, throwing him off balance. Officer Bradley dove toward the taller criminal, using his recovered strength to tackle him. Sarah kept her weapon trained on the chaos, ready to fire if necessary, but hoping she wouldn't have to. The shorter man's rifle discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as he fell, and Rex maintained his grip on the man's leg, while Officer Bradley subdued the other criminal. Within minutes, both men were secured with their own ropes, and Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe. The sound of the approaching snowplow grew louder, accompanied by voices calling out. Officer Bradley managed to retrieve the emergency whistle from his equipment and sent out a series of sharp blasts that would guide the rescue team to their location. Sarah carefully made her way to the rear compartment, where she found a young woman in her 20s, pale and weak but alive. The woman's eyes filled with tears when Sarah brought her baby to her. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought I'd never see my daughter again." When the rescue team finally reached the train car, they found Officer Bradley had everything under control. The two criminals were in custody, the evidence they'd tried to destroy was secured, and 3 lives had been saved by the courage of a 17-year-old girl and her loyal dog. Sarah's father was among the rescue team, having spent the night organizing search parties when she hadn't returned home. The relief in his eyes when he saw his daughter safe was worth every frightening moment she'd endured. The case that followed exposed a corruption network that reached throughout the county, just as Henderson's blackmail records had suggested. But most importantly, a baby girl would grow up knowing that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the worst storms, proving that courage and determination can overcome even the darkest circumstances.